Listen, I don't talk about this often because, even now, years later, it sends a chill down my spine. What happened one late October night when I was 19? It was harvest season. My cousin Mark and I had taken an odd job helping a farmer near Millersville. He owned this massive cornfield, easily 100 acres, and our task was to stack the harvested corn into the barn. The work was boring, but it paid well. That night, Mark and I stayed late because rain was forecasted, and the farmer wanted everything done before it hit. It was after 10 p.m. when he left, handing us a flashlight, the keys to his old pickup, and his usual warning, "Don't wander into the cornfield at night. It plays tricks on you." We laughed it off, thinking it was just one of those creepy small-town tales. But as the hours dragged on, the atmosphere started to change. The cornfield, which had felt harmless during the day, began to feel different. There was an unnatural silence, no crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Mark, being the joker he was, decided it was the perfect time to mess with me. While I was stacking the corn, he vanished without a word. I called out for him, but he didn't respond. Typical Mark. I figured he'd wandered into the corn to scare me, so I grabbed the flashlight and went in after him. The moment I stepped between the rows, I felt something was off. The stalks seemed taller than I remembered, their tops disappearing into the darkness. The air was thick and suffocating, and my flashlight barely cut through the gloom. I called out again. "Mark, quit messing around." Still nothing. That's when I heard it, a rustling sound, but not from the wind. It was deliberate, like something moving through the corn. I froze, listening. It wasn't far, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, but every time I turned toward it, the sound seemed to shift, circling me. I tried to convince myself it was Mark playing a prank. It had to be Mark. But then I heard him scream. It wasn't a playful scream, not the kind he'd used to scare me. It was raw, terrified, and came from deeper in the field. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't leave him. I ran toward the sound, crashing through the rows. The corn seemed endless, the rows stretching on no matter how far I went. Then I stumbled into a clearing. In the middle of the clearing stood a scarecrow. But it wasn't there earlier, it couldn't have been. It was crude, with a burlap sack for a head and twisted branches for arms. What stopped me cold was its face. The sack had 2 holes where the eyes should be, and something shiny glinted within them, like real eyes staring back at me. At the base of the scarecrow was Mark's flashlight, flickering weakly. I didn't think twice. I grabbed the flashlight and ran. The rustling behind me grew louder, closer. I swear I could hear breathing, shallow, quick, and too close for comfort. I burst out of the cornfield, gasping for air. The truck was in sight, and I bolted toward it. But Mark wasn't there. I honked the horn, screamed his name, but no answer came. Just as I was about to give up and leave, Mark stumbled out of the corn, pale as a ghost and clutching his side. His shirt was torn, and there was a long, deep gash running across his ribs. He wouldn't say what happened. He just kept repeating, "We have to go. Now." We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were miles away. I wanted to go back, to figure out what we'd seen, but Mark refused. He quit the job the next day and moved 2 towns over. The farmer never asked why we didn't return. He just gave me this look, like he knew exactly what had happened. Here's the part that still haunts me. A week later, the farmer's barn burned to the ground. They found nothing in the ashes, no tools, no equipment, nothing except a single scarecrow, completely untouched. So yeah, laugh if you want. Call it a ghost story or my imagination running wild. But I know what I saw. And I'll never set foot in a cornfield again. It was a late summer evening, and I had been working on the farm all day. The sun had just dipped behind the horizon, leaving a deep orange glow. I was tired, but I had one last task, checking the irrigation system in the farthest field. It was a long walk, and the field stretched on for what felt like miles, but it was part of the job. I grabbed my flashlight and set out. The air was thick with the smell of earth and growing things. The corn in the field was tall, almost as tall as me, and it rustled softly in the evening breeze. There was something almost peaceful about it, at least at first. As I walked deeper into the field, the sound of the wind through the leaves was the only thing I could hear. The flashlight barely cut through the darkness, making everything feel close and claustrophobic. I was used to the solitude of the fields, but tonight felt different. There was an unusual stillness in the air, like the world around me had fallen silent. Then I heard it. A twig snapped behind me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing. The field was as empty as before. I laughed at myself, trying to brush it off. It was probably a raccoon or a rabbit, I thought. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched lingered in my mind. The sound came again, closer this time. I stopped and swung my flashlight around, the beam dancing across the rows of corn. Still nothing. I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the growing unease. I needed to finish this. I had to get back home. As I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced behind me again, but there was nothing there. Just the rows of corn stretching into the darkness. Then, I heard it, a voice, faint but unmistakable. "Hey!" It was soft, almost like a whisper, but clear enough to send a chill down my spine. I whipped around, shining the flashlight in every direction. There was no one. No movement in the corn. I stood there for a long moment, frozen. My mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks on me? Maybe it was a joke from one of the other workers? But I knew deep down that I wasn't hearing things. I took a few more steps, hoping to finish my task and get out of there. But then, I heard it again. "Hey, you!" It was closer this time. I swung the flashlight frantically, but nothing. Nothing but rows and rows of corn. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The whisper came again, this time louder, closer, as if it was right behind me. I turned around quickly. And there he was. A man, standing just a few feet away in the corn. I could barely make out his figure, but I could see his eyes, dark, unmoving, and fixed on me. He wasn't moving, just standing there in the shadows, his hands at his sides. I didn't say anything. I just stared. The air was thick with tension. The man didn't speak. He just stood there. And that's when I noticed something else. His clothes were old, tattered, like something from another time. His skin was pale, almost unnaturally so. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that silent stare. My heart was pounding, my legs frozen in place. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. I didn't even see him move. 1 second, he was standing there, and the next, the space was empty. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, pushing through the corn, tripping over the uneven ground. My flashlight fell to the dirt, and I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of that field. When I finally reached the edge of the field, I didn't stop. I ran all the way back to the barn and locked myself inside. I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. But every time I walk past that cornfield, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And sometimes, when the wind is still, I swear I can hear a faint whisper on the breeze. "Hey!" You ever feel like you've been somewhere you weren't supposed to be? That's exactly how I felt the night my brother Ethan and I got trapped in the cornfield near our grandfather's old farm. It was late October, and we were visiting Grandpa for the weekend. His farm wasn't the same since Grandma passed. He didn't take care of it much anymore, but the cornfield was still there, sprawling for acres, its stalks tall and dry. Locals always had stories about that field, about strange sounds and people disappearing. Grandpa called it nonsense, but he had one rule: don't go into the field after dark. Ethan and I were restless that night, so we decided to explore. I don't know if it was the thrill of breaking Grandpa's rule or just boredom, but we grabbed a flashlight and headed out. The moment we stepped into the cornfield, the world seemed to change. The tall stalks towered over us, swaying lightly in the breeze, their rustling almost like whispers. We laughed at first, daring each other to go further in, the flashlight barely lighting the way. But after a while, the laughter died down. It got colder, and the air felt heavy. The flashlight started flickering, which Ethan blamed on the old batteries. I wasn't so sure. Then we heard it, a faint rustling, but it wasn't from the wind. It came from deeper in the field, rhythmic, like footsteps crunching on dry leaves. Probably a deer, Ethan whispered, but I could hear the nervousness in his voice. We kept walking, though, trying to brush off the unease. But the sound kept following us, growing louder, closer. I stopped and swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing, just endless rows of corn. "Let's head back," I said, trying to sound calm. Ethan nodded, and we turned around. That's when we realized we had no idea which way we'd come. The rows all looked the same, stretching endlessly in every direction. Panic started to set in. We walked faster, calling out for Grandpa, but our voices felt swallowed by the dense field. That's when Ethan froze. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing ahead. In the dim beam of the flashlight, I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the path. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow, but it was too tall, too human-like. Its head was tilted to the side, its body unnaturally still. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. We backed away slowly, but then the figure shifted, its head snapping upright. It turned toward us, though I couldn't make out any features, just a dark silhouette. "Run!" Ethan yelled, grabbing my arm. We bolted, crashing through the stalks, not caring about the path anymore. The sound of footsteps followed us, heavy and fast. I didn't dare look back. We ran until we stumbled out of the field and into the yard by Grandpa's house. We collapsed on the porch, gasping for breath. When I finally looked up, the field was still and silent, like nothing had happened. Grandpa found us there a few minutes later. When we told him what we saw, he didn't laugh or call us crazy. He just shook his head and said, "I told you not to go in there at night." We left the next morning, and I haven't been back to that farm since. Ethan and I never talked about it again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that rustling sound in my head, and I wonder if whatever was in that field is still waiting for someone else to wander in.